story I am going to read is called This Will Help. This will help. My sister recommended that I go see her psychic when I told her that my heart was broken. My sister, who has 3 kids under 4, who never has time for anything anymore. When I asked her if the woman was really psychic, she said, well, it's cheaper than therapy, you know, but bring cash. So I called the psychic. Her name was Connie. I introduced myself over the phone, telling her that my sister had given me her number, that she said hello. All the while I was thinking, shouldn't she already know all of this? But then I realized maybe it doesn't work over the phone. Connie the psychic told me to come into her office. I didn't know psychics had offices, I said, trying to break the ice. Well, it's a home office, she said. So I made an appointment for the following Tuesday. It was Friday when we talked, and I didn't have anything else going on between then and Tuesday, but I wanted it to seem like I did. That's fine, she said. See you then. Turned out Connie's home office was 2 blocks from my apartment. I had walked by the place too many times to count, but never really noticed it. It was a storefront with a big picture window and a neon sign that said, Psychic. The door was locked when I tried it, so I went to the window and peered inside. All I could see was the front room. That's it.
Grip.
Grab?
Where's the grip?
Sorry about that. All I could see was the front room. At the back was a wide doorway that had been covered by drapes that pulled together in a huddled mass on the floor. The room was empty except for a small plain table and 2 chairs. A man and a woman sat at the table. The man was facing the window where I stood outside. When he saw me, he propped his elbow up on the table and hid his face behind his hand. I could only see the woman a little bit, but she reminded me of someone. I felt bad for the guy. He looked so embarrassed, so I turned away from the window. But I really felt bad for myself, locked outside of a psychic's office, and I tried to make it look like I had other important business on that part of the street. But it was time for my appointment, 5 minutes past actually, and there was nowhere to go, and the bums were eyeing me, and I was trying to size them up and figure out whether they were harmless or not, when the door opened, and the man stepped out, brushing by me at almost a jog, shoving on a pair of black sunglasses and heading down the sidewalk, away. Away from the psychic, the storefront with the neon sign, and me standing outside of it all. I looked back at the woman who was now standing in the doorway. It was my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Drake. She looked older, of course. I mean, it had been 20-odd years, but her hair was the same ashy blonde gray, her eyes still the color of forget-me-nots. And yes, in every way, this woman and my kindergarten teacher were identical. I said, Mrs. Drake? I couldn't imagine bearing my soul to my kindergarten teacher. I was thinking of reasons to leave. She probably knew that. No, she said, looking annoyed. I'm Connie. I told you on the phone, remember? She came outside, still holding the door open, and then pushed me in with her hand at my back. It felt like dancing. Inside, it smelled like curry and onions. Mrs. Drake was wearing an orange sari with lots of embroidery and tiny little mirrors that flashed all around the neckline. They caught the dusty sunlight coming in from the window and reflected little spherical patches of light onto the walls, her fleshy neck, my arms. I wondered if we sat very still whether the spots would begin to smoke and whether I would catch fire. The room was otherwise very dim, the light so muted that it was hard to see. The only other source of light seemed to be coming from somewhere behind me. First, 2 minutes of silence, she said. I was sitting in the man's chair. The seat was still warm. Behind Mrs. Drake was a large circular wall clock, the kind you learn to tell time on. The second hand moved fluidly toward the 12. She stared at my face, gave me an up and down, and then kept staring. People walked by the picture window and cupped their hands at the glass, peering in at us. It was dark, but they could see. They could see me talking to a psychic. I wanted to hide my face like the man had done, but I didn't want it to be obvious, so I did nothing. Mrs. Drake was still staring. It made my eyes water. I don't know why I'm here, I told her, whoever she was. My sister told me to come. She didn't answer, and I went back to studying the clock. The second hand began its descent. "I don't know why you're here either," said Mrs. Drake, Connie, the psychic. She spoke to me in a soft, lulling voice, and when she touched my face, her hands felt nice. They were plump and soft, and I wanted her to touch me some more. The hairs on her arms were blonde and fine. "I thought you were psychic," I said, "and I mean that in a nice way." "Well, that's not how it works, dear," she said, and for some reason that made me feel better. "Now give me your hands," she said. I heard a scream, high and quick, from behind the drapes. I looked over at the doorway, but the drapes offered nothing. The psychic's eyes never left mine. "Your hands," she said. It sounded like a question, but it wasn't. I gave them to her. "Tell me a little bit about yourself, dear," she said, which made me feel worse all over again. "Don't get me wrong," I said, "but I don't know how I feel about this whole psychic thing. Isn't it kind of cheating if I tell you about myself?" She got kind of huffy then, letting out little breathy puffs from her wrinkled point-purse of a mouth. The way she drew in her lips in after each one reminded me of an anus. Then she told me that she could help me find love. "Really?" I asked her. "How?" I was excited. This is what I wanted more than anything. I squeezed both of her meaty hands. Then Mrs. Drake, the psychic, said that I would not find love unless I paid her $1,000 to light a candle on a mountain. She explained that the candle must burn without protection from the elements for 3 days. She said the cost included her travel expenses and that she would watch the candle herself to make sure that it didn't go out. "I can invoice everything if you want," she said, "but that will take a while, and then it'll cost more." "I've never heard of anyone invoicing for the time it takes to drop an invoice," I said. "I mean, that's the cost of doing business. And anyway, doesn't it get windy up there? I mean, how are you going to make sure it's still burning? Like you just stick a candle on the ground and wait around to make sure it doesn't blow out? And then what if it does go out? Do I get a refund?" There was another scream, and I heard something fall. It sounded heavy, like a fridge. "Don't worry," she said, "it's complicated, but it won't go out, I guarantee it." Then she told me that her family had been doing this for people for many years. For example, her mother did it, and her mother's mother in India. She said other things too, like how she would waive the cost of invoicing since my sister was such a special client, and also that she had a good feeling about my situation, and she should know, since she had been responsible for many marriages herself. I realized then that the whole time I had been there, I could hear 2 little kids on the other side of the curtain. I figured that's where the home part of the office was, and I thought that they might be her kids, but maybe not. I mean, she had to have been in her 60s at least. I could hear them talking, although I couldn't make out what they were saying. Then one of the kids would let out this high-pitched shriek, and then there would be the sound of the 2 of them racing around. Clomp, clomp, clomp. I could tell they were very young. They sounded like girls, but then they all sound like girls until a certain point. The psychic ignored all of it until we had discussed the candle lighting ceremony. Then the one kid screamed again, and the psychic got red in the face and screamed back, "Silence!" Her hands were shaking, and her chest, what I could see above the dangling mirrors on her sari, was red and splotchy. There was no sound from the other side of the curtain after that. I told her I would have to think about the candle ceremony, as I wasn't sure if I was ready for all of that, and she nodded, knowing that I was lying, that I was really just trying to get out of it because I didn't have the money. But then she tried to convince me, saying the sooner that we did it, or rather I paid her and she did it, the sooner I would find love. Real love this time, not bargain basement, she said. "What do you mean?" I said. "It was real. It was real love." "No," she said. "It was discounted." A few months later, I ran into her crossing the street. "Hey, Connie," I said. She looked right at me but kept walking, dragging these 2 little Indian kids, dragging them across the crosswalk. I was right. They were both girls. It was easy to pick out the screamer.